Well, hello everybody, and I'm really honoured to introduce a cream of the crop panel. So let me start by taking us around who's here, and then we'll introduce some key themes. So firstly, I'm really proud to have with us Natalie Bell. Natalie being the Managing Director of MGOND in London. Many accomplishments under her belt, I think multi-award winning as a digital leader, and I think we are but weeks away, Natalie, from your agency being named by Campaign as the Global Media Agency of the Year, which is one hell of an achievement. Phenomenal. So we're really honoured to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. James, welcome. James Murphy, as our viewers will probably know, last time there's a global crisis, thought, I know this is the moment to form my own creative agency because that's a nice low risk thing to do in a time of crisis. And James, I think it took you less than 3 years for Adam and Eve to win your first Campaign Agency of the Year. I think you were probably initially famous for the John Lewis Christmas ads that still make me cry in all the right ways. And I think not content with that, 4 years in a row, the agency you led achieved Campaign Creative Agency of the Year. Phenomenal result. And having done that, found another crisis to launch another new agency and new commercial art. So welcome, and we're honoured to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.
And finally, to bring us a perspective from beyond Adland, we're honoured to have Louisa Harrison Walker. Louisa is founder and CEO of Sheffield's ethical recruitment and retention agency Benchmark, and also among the many ways she generously gives her time to the wider community and commercial interests of the world is the interim director of the Sheffield Chamber of Commerce. Louisa, very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to see you all.
Now, we're here, we'd normally be doing a panel in person, and so we can't ignore the fact that we are coming out of lockdown, but still in a pandemic, and it's been a hell of a few months for everybody. So I wanted to start with personal reflections as we've gone through all the emotional and practical turmoil of lockdown, as well as the challenges. What are the positive things you've learned? I'd be interested in each panelist, if you want to share with us one positive thing that you've learned during lockdown that you'll be looking to take forward into the rest of life. Lou, should we start with you? What do you have in mind?
Yeah, I think with regards to the working world, obviously I've spent my life sort of skills, employment and education, and for a long time I've been arguing the benefits of flexible working, allowing people to work part-time, work around family commitments, caring commitments and so on. And I've often been met with the reservation of, no, this job needs to be full-time, it needs to be permanent. I'm really pleased to see the step change from hours worked to outcomes. So rather than people feeling that they need to clock in and clock out and justify the amount of time they've spent in a day, the reality of us all juggling everything that we're having to juggle and still managing to get things done. So I think we've proven that home working and flexible working can be done, and I don't want us to go backwards from that. I would like to see us continue that trend.
Great insight. It is all about the talent. Thank you. James, would you like to come in next? What are you learning from the lockdown?
I think perhaps might sound slightly contradictory to Louisa's point, but it's not actually, it's complementary, which is to say that I think the importance of human contact in what we do, because on one level, it's I think things like kind of Zoom and Teams and so on have proved to be massively effective, and they are really quite efficient in the way that people tend to hurry up and get to the point and try and get to decisions on those things. But it's interesting because when you really have something quite tough to crack together, you can almost feel the yearning to try and get into a space together and try and scrum on an idea or trying to solve a problem. And it's interesting how for perfunctory everyday things like Zoom and Teams work, but when you really have a challenge to solve together, there's nothing like getting together, I think, and that's quite a reassuring thing.
I agree, very reassuring. What have you found, Natalie?
Well, I think just further to both of those points, actually, and particularly Louisa's, we as an agency moved to agile working last year, and I remember just how big a leap that felt at the time. And thankfully we did, because it prepared us to immediately, shift into working from home. But I think it offers a really interesting, not just flexible opportunity, but an outside of London opportunity for us now to consider how we access talent all over the place, because we're not locked to that office. But I do certainly agree with James. I met up with 2 other colleagues on Friday in our leadership team, and the difference just a couple of hours together made, and I can't quite work out why. I can't work out why that is. I don't know if it's because it doesn't feel quite so intense as a conversation. It can be a bit looser, but certainly I think it's put a spotlight on both those things.
Thank you. I think a lot of agreement there rather than contradiction. So in Alight Media, we're a very new business, and we've certainly found there's no functional reason to drag people into an office. Everything has functionally worked perfectly smoothly as we had to disperse and work from home. And I know some of our people have enjoyed it, and some other people are climbing the walls to get back out and see people. And I think human connection is hard to simulate and is an incomparable way to create ideas. You've all talked about talent and humanity, and I think that is hard to do, but it's only ever mediated through a piece of glass. So I have strong agreement from you there. But I've talked about humanity, and I want to move on and talk about consumers. So in Adland, I grew up most of my career on client side as a marketing director and commercial director and so forth. And I formed a strong view that ultimately, if you're swimming against consumer behaviour, you're going to lose. You ultimately have to understand and go with consumer behaviour. So I'm interested in what are the consumer truths that we have here. So I'm going to come to James first. So I mentioned in the introduction that a dozen years ago you launched an agency in a crisis. You're now launching an agency in a very different type of crisis. I'm interested in what consumer truths do we think will snap back and continue to be underlying human truths that will be the same? And where do you think consumer behaviour will be different over the coming months of years as we come out of the lockdown?
I think that probably I think that there were trends already in play that have just become more marked and more are almost becoming more ruthlessly applicable now, which are because I think the fragmentation of media and the fact that so many of the media that we use in marketing communications have become two-way media had really created a situation where I think in terms of someone who's creating communications for brands, I think you had 2 options, and it was to hark back to a phrase from William Morris, the sort of famous kind of Victorian designer and aesthete, and he said, "Have nothing in your life that is neither beautiful or useful." And I think that we already had a trend for that, where consumers were either in the battle for their attention, you either had to show them something beautiful that gave value to them in terms of being inspiring or funny or moving or something, or you had to show them something useful that actually said, look, here's where you can go to get something better, or it's actually about that value transaction. And the current crisis has just exacerbated that, because I think people are moving between 2 states very, very seamlessly, because they're in home, often family environments, and they're having to move between the worlds of work and the worlds of family and leisure, sort of in the space of a few feet. And I think that means that you have even more pressure to be beautiful or useful in that environment.
Fascinating. So it puts a greater premium on the quality of the content and the creative work that's developed and shown in the advertising.
Yes, and I mean, certainly in terms of the agency that we launched about 2 months ago, was the reason we're bringing together kind of brand creativity and customer experience creativity is because that idea of, okay, beautiful and useful, and it's how do we make sure that we can win in the battle for attention and involvement with consumers.
Thank you. Similar question to Natalie. I know you have some clients who have gone very quiet through the lockdown, and other clients, for example, the government, who have been really busy. What have you seen in the different ways that you need to plan media to reach consumers through lockdown, and perhaps more particularly as we emerge from lockdown? How are you planning differently to reach people?
Yeah, I think I just want to further James's point a second, actually, because I think there's something really interesting about the role that advertising has played through this, and actually that the particularly through a period where a number of amazing brands were creating really quite uplifting and sort of mirroring the culture that was happening and people's emotion, which was lovely to see. And I think through this, a lot of our clients, a lot of our planners are certainly being much more empathetic, forced to be much more empathetic to humans, which for me has been a brilliant thing. And I think in all of the media that we use and that we plan to, we're almost seeing each of the channels play to their absolute almost initial strength. So, you know, news brands are as or more important than ever. TV is entertaining us more than it ever has. Social, actually, ignoring some of the challenges we've seen recently, social as a platform is back to connection and sharing and sort of viral trends. And then, of course, out of home actually has been much more about the context in which it is, and much more about the locality. So I think it's been fascinating to see how media has sort of almost gone back to, each channel's gone back to its roots. And I think for our planners, they're having to almost think back to the basics of media planning, which I think is brilliant, which is understanding audiences, because audiences have shifted. Some of the old data we rely on doesn't apply when everything changes. So actually, from a media planning perspective, I think it's never been more interesting, and it's teaching us some of the basics which are really important alongside the sophistication that we have now.
That's really interesting, and I want to come on and ask about the role of the media, because I think if people are being forced to rethink their plans, it will show where people really are and how we connect with them, and particularly seen in out of home, the role you talked about, media going back to their roots, the way out of home has become the canvas on which a lot of the national conversation has been painted with NHS messages and so forth. I think has been a really powerful illustration of that. I also, while we're focusing on consumers, I want to ask Louisa from Sheffield and South Yorkshire, what have you seen for how consumers and grassroots SMEs, it's very early in the bounce back, I know, but how have you seen people cope, and how have you seen people start to emerge from the depths of the lockdown and into the bounce back?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting time, a really interesting time. I always think, we don't want to waste a good crisis in some regards, because it's given lots of people an opportunity, like Natalie and James were saying, of almost going back to the basics about what's important. I think the first few weeks, first month, everybody was in shock, and there was a real okay. And then I think when the realization hit that actually this is not going to be a flash in the pan, this is going to be something that will be here for a while. I think that's people are in it for the long haul, and people are starting to recognise that. I think what's been really positive, something that we've had here in Sheffield, is that the business community and the different groups that are represented in Sheffield. So obviously we have the Sheffield Chamber that represents the business networks, Sheffield Digital, which represents the creative and digital industries in Sheffield, which is a huge industry for us. Twinkle Hive, you may have heard of Twinkle, but they're EdTech specialists. They're launching an EdTech centre here in Sheffield. There's a realisation that there's opportunity. So whilst certain sectors are treading carefully, there's certain sectors that are absolutely storming, that are really seeing a massive uplift in what they do. I think we're quite fortunate. I can only talk about my region, really. I think we're quite fortunate in our region that we have a really diverse mix of businesses here. I mean, 87% of the businesses in Sheffield are SMEs, micro SMEs, 10 employees or less. So they're quite agile. They're able to pivot. They're able to flight of foot, which has been really helpful. But all the different organisations have come together around the local authority. We formed a business response group, and we're helping Sheffield City Council write an economic recovery plan that's been devised with those business groups. And that's surprisingly, it's actually the first time that kind of collaboration has happened. I'd always assumed that those kind of collaborations did happen, but apparently not. So that's been a real positive that's come out of this, is that there's a real sense of we're all in this together. We all want a vibrant economy. We all want economic growth, but we're not at the risk of social exclusion. So everybody's joined around that mission of how we, I hate the phrase, but build back better. But how we take this opportunity, to really set our stall out. Certainly in our region, we're the fourth biggest city in the UK, and I don't think we shout loud enough about that. I don't think people realise how much we have going on here, really.
Well, it's great to have you here and give you a platform to shout about it. That's exactly what we want to hear. And whether we like the phrase build back better or not, what I'm hearing from all three of you is this is a moment in which we can choose how to behave in the future. So, Natalie, I've heard you talk about going back to the fundamentals of planning. And James, you talk about the increased importance of being beautiful and or useful for the consumer. Let's explore the role of creative a little bit, because James, you've won, I think, a big contract with the World Out of Home Organization to promote the medium, but also engagement with the medium. I'd be interested if you want to talk about that briefly, but also your broader observations of what you see working in the out of home medium and other media. What do you think is working creatively at the moment as we get back to basics and beautiful and useful?
I think that, I mean, out of home is sort of, I think that the power of out of home has sort of rallied and strengthened on two fronts. One of them is very traditional in the sense that its power to be a really truly public and shared medium is that power is greater than ever, because actually, as so many other channels are becoming atomized and appealing to sometimes much more narrow audiences, albeit sometimes very valuable ones, and very efficiently targetable ones, there's no medium quite like outdoor to allow you to have and shape a public and perhaps a national conversation. And I think, and then at the other end, I think it's gathered power in terms of, at the sort of most modern end of the industry, in terms of digital out of home's ability to create very, very dynamic, creative opportunities for brands, but also actually, who would have thought that if the outdoor industry would become an interactive and a social media in its own right, where you can have campaigns really coming to life in real time through the interaction of outdoor and social.
Fascinating, thank you. And I agree, as other media deliver increased targeting, which is clearly very valuable and useful, I think brands are in danger of losing out on the ability to make a public promise. And I think the impact of a brand talking to the nation all at one time, and we all know that, I think creates a very different set of brand statures than a series of micro-marketing.
It's no mistake that the government has made a lot of use of outdoor, because I mean, I always refer to it as it's the most political of media. And what I mean by that is because it necessitates boiling down a message to its absolute essence. Outdoor at its best is like political messaging at its best, which is it's absolutely focused and effective. And certainly there are times with your commercial clients where you almost go, look, I think we are at a political moment for a brand. Perhaps we want to reposition it around a new idea, or we want to react to something that's going on in society. And outdoor has that ability to sort of paint your message in a big and pretty evocative way.
Thank you. And I'm going to take that segue because, Natalie, you've been planning the government's campaign over the last few months. What role have you seen out of home play for government or other clients through the lockdown and emerging from it?
Yeah, so our OmniGov team have been very busy, it's fair to say. And I guess it's quite clear that out of home is a very useful tool for the government at the moment with messaging around lockdown, but it has almost become a notice board. You know, it's exactly that. It's that public notice board and constant reminder. What I would say is, and Matthew, we talked about this recently. I don't just say this because of the environment I'm in. Out of home is my favourite media, and I come from I promise I'm not Bruce Forsyth. I don't say that to everyone. I come from a digital background, and actually I do love exactly what James just talked about, both of those sort of big fame public pieces you can play with out of home, but then at the same time the digital nature and the investment that's going into digital now and the capabilities that gives. So for the government, out of home's been an extremely useful channel because, first of all, obviously there's been different nations approaches, different nations messaging. So out of home's allowed that. It's all been pretty much all digital, by the way, in the messaging. And then also when you have something like enjoy summer safely as a campaign message, and just as you're about to launch, you have Leicester go into lockdown, then the ability to be flexible with out of home is obviously incredibly important. So it has become, for both of those reasons, a very important channel. But I do think the digital out of home piece, and again, back to that point about beautiful and useful, I think were James's words. The useful bit, if you think about some of our retail clients, a client like Specsavers, who are now starting to open stores, but at different capacity levels, need to stimulate the demand into those stores. Actually, what we're now running is appointment availability live through digital out of home to direct people to the stores, which is a very useful tool, especially now. It was before, but thank goodness we have that up and running, because capacity is different. We need to be able to manage that flow. So I think both ends of that are what make out of home a really lovely channel.
Thank you. It's great to hear you both talk about that, particularly because Alike Media was founded on the basis of 3 beliefs, of which one was that digital out of home should be a digital first medium rather than treated as a posh scroller. And so I'm pretty pleased to hear you both talk about what we can do with digitization of posters to use the media properly rather than just scroll through in a standard block. So I'm pleased to hear that. James, that's one of the things I love about lockdown is the new normals are working. I think that's fantastic. So I'm glad to have a broader audience live with us.
Absolutely.
So having talked about one belief, which is using digital right as a digital first medium, another belief we had when we founded Alike was, much though we love London, we think there's life beyond London, and there's a danger in out of home that a lot of focus has gone on building assets in London, Birmingham, Manchester, places like that. And we're firm believers that there are first-class human beings in the whole country. So what we're looking to do across billboards and 6 sheets is to make sure we provide proper coverage across the country. So, and we're reaching 9 to 10 million adults every fortnight, and part of that is through the big contract we won in South Yorkshire. So I wanted to ask Louisa to reflect on what you're seeing from the economic vibrancy of the region and how we can help SMEs in particular build back, but also the cultural vibrancy across South Yorkshire as one of the big hubs, as you say, that outside maybe doesn't shout enough about how vibrant it is.
I think that's one of our failings in Sheffield is we're quite humble as people. It's just the way people are here. You know, so I suppose cities like Leeds and Manchester probably shout louder, and we don't like to be showy-offy. But there's a reason that we have a 70% retention rate of graduates in this city, because people come to Sheffield, then they discover that a third of Sheffield's in the Peak District, which people don't realise. We're one of the only cities with, you know, Peak District boundary. You know, we've got the outside of London, the biggest theatre complex with the Crucible and the Lyceum. So you've probably seen some of their, like everybody's talking about Jamie, Life of Pi. You know, they all came out of Sheffield, out of Crucible Theatre. We have the Doc Fest, which is an internationally renowned documentary festival that happens in Sheffield every year. We have the Children's Media Conference, which is a national festival. Cliffhanger, which you probably heard, you may have heard of. This is a mecca for rock climbers, Sheffield. So we have Cliffhanger, which is a massive national rock climbing conference that happens here. Big outdoor event. Sorry, that's a child in the background. Sheffield it's a really unique place. I mean, I'm born and bred in Sheffield, so I'm very passionate about it. I have lived elsewhere and I've always come back because I just think it's such a wonderful blend of, we've got a really strong city centre with, you know, nightclubs, restaurants. You've probably heard of the Lead Mill. It's where, you know, all our bands like Pulp, Arctic Monkeys, you know, they all played the music scene in Sheffield before they go off to big international things. But we've got really strong suburbs. So you might have seen that Kelham Island and Sharrow Vale are in the top 10 like coolest places to live in the UK. We've got so many independents, like independent shops and cafes and restaurants, and it's a city of makers. So when we lost the steelworks in the 80s, Sheffield really reinvented itself, you know, and its artisans and its creatives, and it's got, yeah, it's very diverse in that regard. And I think at my business, we traded through the 2008 recession. And I think one of the reasons that Sheffield fared quite well was because we have our fingers in a lot of different pies. There's no one sector that leads. You know, we've got really strong creative, digital and IT, but obviously we still have manufacturing and engineering. We do really high-end precision manufacturing and engineering that goes into you know, aerospace, defence, all of that. We produce more steel in Sheffield now than we ever have. It's true, but with a lot less people.
Louisa, that's fantastic. Thank
yeah.
you. So let me draw that, because I think that's a really good showcase for how vibrant different parts of the country are. Now, I've heard a lot of media planners talk about, particularly in out of home, for example, roadside audiences are coming back. They're not quite at their pre-COVID levels, but they're pretty close to them. But the nature of the audience has changed. You get people doing shorter journeys and living their whole life nearer where they live, with people live, work, shop, play, and more in the local areas. And you were rightly boasting about Sheffield having 2 of the UK's top 10 places to live. Natalie, are you seeing a change in the way people are planning? Is there an increased localisation in the way that you're looking to plan? And then I'll ask James about your thoughts on the power of localised creative and whether you think brands should be reflecting more the area where the creative's appearing.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, yeah, the obviously we know the data is telling us, and I mean all the data that we have to hand is telling us that audiences have changed. They're coming back, but we need to reconsider how we're reaching them. What I think is really important, though, is what we don't want to end up doing as planners is move from a sort of London bubble view of the world to our own local bubble view of the world. And I think that's the important thing with the audience data that we can now access, is that we interrogate it properly, because I do fear that we're suddenly just, you know, people could lazily become suburb planners because that's what they're now seeing themselves. So certainly audiences are changing, and I think also the role that out of home can play with those audiences is changing as well. I thought we'd see more brands being sort of celebrating being an outdoor again. I think McDonald's have had a lovely campaign at the moment, you know, talking about being back in out of home, which is nice. But I thought we'd see more. I don't know if it's because we didn't sort of tip over immediately. Everything was a little bit more gradual. But I think it's both audiences and role of out of home that we need to constantly question now and not slip into lazy planning.
Big fan of data rather than lazy planning, and I agree with you. I'm looking forward to seeing brands come out. I wonder if it's early for them to celebrate. James, what are your thoughts on the right creative tone and whether localization is important?
I think on the right creative tone, I think it is very, I think it's quite a delicate moment at the moment, because I think perhaps 3 weeks ago, it probably felt like the clouds were parting a bit, the sun was starting to shine a bit more, and lockdown was starting to come to an end. But I think with things like the situation in Leicester and some of the situations we've seen in other European cities and regions, you're realizing that actually it's a much more delicate situation. And I think brands need to be pretty careful and pretty sensitive. And I think that's also true about the second bit of your question about localization, because I think it feeds into this, I think perhaps the responsibility and the expectation of brands to be more empathetic and sensitive now than they perhaps, you know, traditionally they're confident and outgoing and sort of firing their messages at people at high energy. And I think the situation is you sort of go, look, it's not that the audience are in a different place mentally, but they're in lots of different places, and lots of people are feeling lots of different things at the moment. Some are clearly super impatient and desperate to get back out there, and particularly on the business front and the economic front. And other people are still feeling pretty cowed by the whole situation. And so I think brands have to be quite sensitive and nuanced in the way that they communicate. And I think that does come down to a local level as well, because the situation is different in different parts of the country. And, you know, in the way that you saw London going through an extreme opening burst of COVID, and then quickly the sort of infection rates tailing off as they picked up in other parts of the country. And I think we're going to have this patchwork to deal with for quite some time.
I think that sounds very smart, and I'm certainly aware in our business that it's not going to be a straight line. There are some weeks that feel better and some that feel worse, and I think that's true for our clients and for the mood of the nation. So I've certainly seen a real evolution on that, and it's important to get the tone right and to not, I think, get scared in the bumps in the road as well as the ups in the road, because we're going to see both. Natalie, you talked about the Leicester lockdown, for example. We're going to see bumps as well. Now, I'm getting the message from me to tell that we're nearly out on time. So I'd like to ask each of you, perhaps in one or two lines, of your advice. We've got a fantastic audience of leaders in media, advertising and out of home for this panel. What's your advice, particularly on how we help clients make the most of out of home media as we come out of lockdown? What are the right things to be doing from a creative or media or SME point of view to help them make the most of the medium and grow their businesses back? Who'd like to go first? Anybody nodding? Natalie, can I come to you? What are your thoughts on what you would advise the industry to do?
I think we have to very much change and look forward. I think clearly in out of home we can't look back to look forward anymore. Audience is a great example. We can't use that to model where audiences are going to be. And I think we need to start talking about things differently in order to give advertisers the confidence, which means greater flexibility, which means more robust audience data that may come from different sources, and we've discussed this, Matthew, but thinking about how pricing fluctuates with footfall, because there is just so much nervousness, and so certainly for me it's sort of changing the parameters by which we're working to give the confidence with the flexibility added in.
Thank you, Natalie. And I do understand that, as you say, we can't look back to audience data to know future audience data. So one of the things we've done in Alight Media is say to brands, if they want, we'll index our price on the audience actually delivered, so that we take the audience risk rather than ask the brand to do that, because I'm very sympathetic to that. Louisa, what would you like the advertising or media industry to do to help particularly SMEs come back? What would be helpful for you and your members of the chamber?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think it's like smart businesses look to experts, don't they? And they take the advice of experts. You guys know consumer behaviour inside out. You can see the opportunity that is presented in terms of out of home, because people are outside a lot more than they will have been before, and they will continue to be. And I think that's something that will continue. But I would like to see helping SMEs to build trust and confidence for people to return to a level of normal that's safe. Yeah, so I think any advice you can give SMEs about how to do that will be really welcome.
Thank you. I think trust and confidence for a new normal are fantastic. And can I thank you for being such a vibrant advocate for life beyond London? And I'll take that as a little hook to say we haven't announced it before, but we one of the ups and downs of lockdown is that we in Alight Media have won another contract. So we're very proud to win the South Yorkshire contract and to be working with you and your colleagues. And we've also just recently in the last days been awarded a contract for Telford and Wrekin, 160,000 people in the West Midlands, where again we'll have exclusive reach. And it's part of the up and down of lockdown is having the confidence to go for that, and seeing your vibrant confidence in your region is really heartening. James, what would your advice to the out of home industry be? What's your view from the work you've seen and done?
I think that I would say there are a lot of brands out there that have their connection with and their relationship with their customers and potential customers has become frayed and fragile, and sometimes has become broken over the period that we've all been through. And they need to re-establish that connection and re-establish their presence with kind of confidence and charisma. And I would say that there really are few other media that can challenge outdoor in terms of its sheer presence, confidence and charisma. And I think that should be the sell. If you want to, as society starts to rebuild its confidence and its appetite for business and consumption and so on, then as we step back out into the light, then what better media is there to show brands out in the light, being confident and charismatic than outdoor.
Thank you. Look, I'm truly honoured to have such a great panel. I think you've offered true wisdom for looking forward, not back to fundamental basics of the new data for the new planning. And James, the confidence and charisma and stature that out of home could give a brand, I think will become even more important, as you said earlier, setting the right tone. So really proud to have spent this time with you. Thank you all very much indeed, and really appreciate it. I wish you well as we continue to emerge from lockdown into our new normal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.